A camera is indifferent. This is its most important quality and the quality that makes it different from every other instrument of visual representation that preceded it. A portrait painter is not indifferent. A portrait painter stands before the subject and makes choices about what to include and what to exclude, about where the light falls and where the shadow is placed, about the expression the subject wears and the position of the hands and the specific arrangement of the composition that the painter has been commissioned to produce, and that the person who commissioned the painting is paying for, which means the person who commissioned the painting has a view about what the painting should show and what it should not show, and the painter, in the normal run of things, is sensitive to that view. A camera does not negotiate with the commission. A camera records what is in front of it with the specific indifference of a mechanical system that does not distinguish between what the photograph was commissioned to document and what is also in the frame. A camera records the wedding party arranged on the church steps for the formal portrait commission, and it records the light and the shadow and the formal dress and the composed expressions and the specific arranged quality of a moment that has been arranged for the purpose of being recorded. And it records, if it is there to be recorded, the detail that the arrangement was designed to exclude. The camera does not make editorial decisions. The camera records. On the 22nd of June, 1894, a photographer named Aldous Briggs, operating under his commercial studio name of Briggs & Son, Photographic Studios, Ashcroft, Devon, set up his camera on the steps of the Church of St. Clement in the village of Ashcroft, and photographed the wedding party of Margaret Alderton and Thomas Carew in the formal compositional style of the period. He arranged the wedding party. He directed them in the specific instructions of the professional Victorian photographer, the stillness, the positions, the arrangement of the train, the specific management of the natural light available on the June morning. He produced the exposure. He produced the print from the exposure. He delivered the prints to the families. The prints were paid for and distributed and displayed and placed in the family albums of both the Alderton and the Carew families, and they circulated in those albums across the subsequent decades and eventually, in the specific way of Victorian-era family photographs that outlived the families who commissioned them, found their way into the Devon Photographic Archive in Exeter, donated as part of the Ashcroft Parish Records collection in 1967. In the Devon Photographic Archive, the Alderton Carew wedding portrait was catalogued, conserved, and shelved in the appropriate collection, where it sat for 54 years, accessible to any researcher who requested the Ashcroft Photographic Collection, until a conservation researcher named Dr. Sarah Marsh requested the collection in 2021 for a study of Victorian-era outdoor photography in the west of England. Dr. Marsh was not looking for what she found. She was examining the collection's prints for photographic condition, the specific conservation concerns of albumin and gelatin silver prints stored for over a century, the specific vocabulary of deterioration that her work required her to document. She was not examining the content of the photographs for anything specific. She was looking at the prints as objects whose condition required assessment. She was looking at the Alderton Carew portrait under the loupe when she noticed the wrist. The loupe is a small magnifying glass, typically 10 power, used by conservation researchers to examine the surface of photographic prints. It is a standard tool for a specific purpose: the assessment of the print's physical condition, the identification of surface damage, the examination of the specific deterioration patterns that Victorian-era photographs produce over a century of storage. It is not typically used to discover the content of the photographs. It is being used to assess. Dr. Marsh was using it to examine the surface of the bride's dress in the Alderton Carew portrait, specifically the sleeves condition in the upper portion of the frame, which was showing the specific silver mirroring deterioration that gelatin silver prints of the period develop in stored conditions. When the loupe moved across the frame to the bride's left wrist, and the detail at the wrist's edge presented itself at the loupe's 10 power magnification, she moved the loupe back. She moved the loupe forward. She held the loupe at the relevant position and she looked for a long time. She described the experience in her field notes, examining print condition, bride's left wrist section. At 10-power magnification, the area immediately above the glove's upper edge shows a detail inconsistent with the dress fabric's shadow pattern. The shadow produced by the glove's edge should fall toward the lower left of the frame given the available light source. The detail visible above the glove edge is positioned differently and has a different quality from the dress fabric's shadow. The detail appears to be on the surface of the skin rather than a shadow of the fabric above it. She wrote, "This may be a condition issue, a blemish in the print's surface that is presenting as a detail in the image rather than as a deterioration artifact. It may be a photographic artifact, a quality of the exposure or the development that has produced a false detail in this area. Or it may be what it appears to be." She wrote, "I am noting it and proceeding with the condition assessment." She proceeded with the condition assessment and she completed the condition assessment and she filed the condition report. And then she went back to the archive and she requested the collection's high-resolution digital scan equipment. And she rephotographed the Alderton portrait under her own supervision at the highest resolution the equipment could produce. And she examined the resulting digital image on the monitor at the maximum digital zoom available. She sat with the digital zoom for a while. Then she wrote in her notebook, "The detail above the glove is not a condition issue and is not a photographic artifact. The detail is in the original image. The detail is what the camera recorded on the 22nd of June, 1894, when Aldous Briggs set up his equipment on the steps of St. Clement's Church in Ashcroft and photographed the Alderton wedding party." She wrote, "The detail is a bruise." She wrote this with the specific care of a conservation researcher who understands the difference between a conservation observation and a historical observation, and who is making both simultaneously. She wrote, "The mark above the bride's left glove is consistent in its coloration as rendered by the period's photographic chemistry, and in its position on the wrist, with a bruise to the soft tissue of the inner wrist approximately 2 to 4 days before the photograph was taken." She wrote, "I am not a physician and this is not a medical assessment." She wrote, "This is what it looks like." She wrote, "I need to look at the other prints in the collection." She wrote, "And then I need to look at the family records. The other prints in the Ashcroft collection from 1894 are 5 in number, all from the same Aldous Briggs studio, all from the same June period. They are group portraits from the wedding celebration, the outdoor luncheon held at the Carew estate following the ceremony, several photographs taken in the afternoon's more informal context. The afternoon's photographs show the same bride. The afternoon's photographs show the same wrist. In the afternoon photographs, the formal gloves have been removed. The photographs were taken in the informal context of the garden party after the ceremony, and the gloves that were part of the formal wedding dress had been removed for the afternoon. Without the gloves, the bride's wrists are visible in 2 of the afternoon photographs. The afternoon photographs at the same digital zoom show both wrists. The right wrist is unremarkable. The left wrist, at the digital zoom's full resolution, shows the specific pattern of soft tissue bruising at the inner wrist, and the extending bruise pattern up the inner forearm that is consistent with, in the specific language of Dr. Marsh's subsequent consultation with a physician colleague, a grip injury. The specific bruise pattern produced when a person's wrist and forearm are gripped forcibly from behind. Dr. Marsh spent 3 days with the Ashcroft photographs before she went to the Devon record office and requested the Alderton family papers. The Alderton family papers in the Devon record office are a standard collection of the type. The accumulated family documents of a prosperous Devon farming family spanning the late 18th to the early 20th century. The specific combination of estate records and personal correspondence and legal documents and household accounts that a family of this standing accumulates, and that eventually finds its way into the county record office through donation or bequest. Dr. Marsh requested the collection and worked through it systematically, beginning with the 1890s section, and found the specific documents she was looking for in the correspondence files for the year 1894, specifically the spring and early summer of 1894, which was the period leading up to the June wedding. The correspondence included letters between the Alderton family and the Carroll family about the marriage settlement's terms, in the formal business letter register of the period, letters from Margaret Alderton's father to his solicitor about the settlement negotiations, the settlement document itself, a formal legal instrument of considerable length, and filed separately from the family correspondence, in a smaller envelope that was not in the family's hand, and that had been folded into the back of the correspondence file at some point in its archival journey, a series of letters in Margaret Alderton's own hand. The letters were not addressed to her father's solicitor. They were addressed to a different solicitor, a firm in Exeter called Watts & Son, which was not the Alderton family's regular legal representative, and which Margaret had apparently identified through a source that the letters themselves did not specify. The letters were from Margaret Alderton to Watts & Son, written between February and May of 1894, in the months between the announcement of her engagement to Thomas Carroll and the June wedding. They were in her own hand, in the careful copperplate of a Victorian woman educated to the standard of her class, and they concerned a specific legal question that she was pursuing independently of her family's legal arrangements. She was asking about the Married Women's Property Act. Specifically, she was asking about the provisions of the 1882 Act that allowed for a wife's separate property to be specified in the marriage settlement. The legal mechanism by which the specific terms of a married woman's property ownership could be set out in a premarital contract in a way that preserved the woman's control over specific assets during the marriage, regardless of the general law's provisions. She was asking, in detail and with considerable legal precision for a woman without legal training, whether the settlement currently being negotiated by her father's solicitor on her behalf included the relevant clauses, and whether the absence of such clauses could be remedied, and what the specific mechanism would be for introducing them into the settlement before the wedding. The first letter, dated the 14th of February, 1894, said, "I have been reading the Married Women's Property Act of 1882, and I believe I understand its provisions sufficiently to ask you the following questions." She listed the questions. She listed them in numbered order clearly, with the specific care of someone who has prepared the questions in advance and who knows that what she asks needs to be precise. Watts & Son replied within the week. Their reply confirmed that the 1882 Act provided the mechanism she was asking about. Their reply also confirmed that the settlement being negotiated by her father's solicitor did not currently include the relevant clauses. Their reply offered to write to her father's solicitor on her behalf to introduce the request for the clauses' inclusion. She wrote back, "Please do so." She wrote, "Please do so before the end of this month." She wrote, "I would like this to be settled before the final settlement is signed." She wrote, "I am writing to you rather than to my father's solicitor because I am not entirely confident that my father's solicitor is managing this settlement with my interests as the primary consideration." She wrote, "I do not require you to tell my father that I am writing to you." Watts & Son wrote to the Alderton family solicitor. The Alderton family solicitor responded. The response was passed to Margaret through Watts & Son. The response was that the clauses would be considered. There were 3 more letters in the exchange before the settlement was signed in May of 1894. The last letter from Watts & Son to Margaret confirmed that the clauses had been included in the final settlement, in the specific form she had requested, and that the settlement as signed gave Margaret Alderton, as she would be after the wedding, Margaret Carroll, the specific property rights and protections that the 1882 Act made available when a marriage settlement explicitly provided for them. Margaret's response to this final letter was a single sentence, "Thank you." She wrote, "I hope this is enough." She wrote, "I believe it will need to be." Dr. Marsh sat with the letters for a long time in the Devon Record Office reading room. She had found, in the 6 months before a June wedding, the specific paper trail of a 22-year-old woman who had identified a legal mechanism, accessed it independently of her family, used it to protect herself, and then gone to her wedding and stood on the church steps in the June morning with her wrists bruised. The letters said what they said. The photographs said what they said. Together, the letters and the photographs constituted the specific combination of documentary evidence that neither document alone could produce. The letters saying what she had been afraid of and what she had done about the fear, and the photographs saying what the fear was about. She wrote in her notebook, "The sequence is this. Margaret Alderton, in February of 1894, read the Married Women's Property Act and identified the specific provision that protected a wife's independent property rights within a marriage settlement. She accessed independent legal advice. Independently, through a solicitor her family did not know she was using. She used the independent legal advice to introduce the protective clauses into the settlement that was being negotiated around her, and without her full participation. She secured the clauses. She went to the wedding in June. She wrote, "The photographs show what the June morning showed the camera, which was the specific physical evidence of the weeks immediately preceding the wedding. The camera recorded it. The camera is indifferent to whether the Photographs Commission included this recording." She wrote, "Margaret Alderton used the law to protect herself before the wedding. The clauses she secured were the mechanism that, when they were needed, provided the legal basis for the protection she had anticipated needing." She wrote, "I found in the Devon census records for 1901 a Margaret Carew living independently in Exeter, listed as separated in a household of her own." She wrote, "I found, in the Devon Record Office's legal records, a maintenance agreement dated 1904 between Thomas Carew and Margaret Carew, in which Thomas Carew agreed to specific financial terms, and which referenced the marriage settlement's clauses as the legal foundation of Margaret's claim." She wrote, "The clauses worked." She wrote, "She was 22 years old in February of 1894, and she read an Act of Parliament, and she found a solicitor in Exeter, and she used the law that was available to her, and the law worked." She wrote, "The portrait shows the bruise. The letters show the planning that preceded the bruise. The 1901 census shows where she went. The 1904 maintenance agreement shows how she got there." She wrote, "The camera recorded the whole story in the bruise above the glove." She wrote, "It took 127 years and a conservation researcher's loupe to see what the camera had recorded." The Devon Photographic Archive in Exeter updated the collection notes for the Alderton Wedding Portrait following Dr. Marsh's 2022 publication. The collection notes now include a summary of the research and a reference to the Devon Record Office's Alderton family papers. The portrait is in the archive's permanent collection. The zoomed detail of the bride's left wrist is included in the updated collection documentation as a separate high-resolution image file, alongside the full portrait, accessible to any researcher who requests the collection. The portrait is beautiful. The formal composition of the June morning, the arrangement of the wedding party on the gray stone steps of St. Clement's Church, the specific quality of the Devon summers, light as recorded by Aldous Briggs's camera in 1894. The portrait is what it was always intended to be, which is a beautiful formal record of a significant occasion. It is also what it was never intended to be, which is the record of what the camera recorded when it was pointed at the wedding party and captured, with its specific indifference to the Commission's intentions, everything that was in the frame. The bruise is in the frame. The letters are in the Devon Record Office. The 1901 census is in the National Archives. The maintenance agreement is in the Devon Record Office. Margaret Carew, née Alderton, born 1872, is in every document she needs to be in. She put herself there. She used a solicitor in Exeter and a reading of the Married Women's Property Act and the specific legal mechanism of the separate property clause in the marriage settlement. and she put herself in the record in the way that ensures the record works when the record is needed. The camera recorded the bruise. The bruise is the evidence that the planning was necessary. The planning was the response. The response worked. She was 22 years old and she read an act of parliament and she found a way. She is here.